coming from radioactive decay of radioactive nuclei, and they can interact with skin and cause cancer. Also, there are energetic electrons and other particles coming from these radioactive nuclei, and all of these things are damaging to living tissue.
Without any wind or other atmospheric effects, that expanding sphere of radiation would stay at dangerous levels for months. Today's missiles can carry nuclear warheads into space, and due to the way atomic bombs interact with Earth's upper atmosphere, one country might decide to target another with a blast in space because it actually causes a lot of damage all the way down on Earth.
When a nuclear weapon goes off above most of the Earth's atmosphere, it releases a bunch of gamma rays, very high energy electromagnetic radiation, that ionize the gas in the atmosphere. That is, they kick the electrons off of the atoms and molecules. Those electrons are kicked largely in a downward direction, and they're moving at a substantial fraction of the speed of light. Now, that creates an incredible electric current, and that can set up big voltage differences and big surges of current in electrical equipment here on Earth.
So if America were the target, there'd be a sudden spike of current known as an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, coming down like a massive invisible ball of lightning. It destroys electronics and anything else carrying an electric current in an instant. Atomic blasts on Earth also create EMPs, but with more limited ranges. By exploding above the atmosphere, a single atomic blast could devastate the country.
It's been estimated that if you lit off a 1 megaton nuclear weapon 100 kilometers over Kansas, you would render most, if not all, the electronics in the United States inoperative.
The damage on Earth from atomic explosions in space isn't just theory. Starting in the late 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, both the United States and the former Soviet Union became the only nations to use space as a nuclear testing ground. One of the last tests, in 1962 above the Pacific Ocean, created an EMP that knocked out electronics all the way from New Zealand to Hawaii.
So you can affect a large area with these currents, these sharp currents, not just the immediate area right below the bomb.
Because of the widespread damage in space and on Earth, both countries stopped these blasts after less than 24 tests. To avoid hitting friendly satellites or spacecraft with big, imprecise nuclear blasts, conventional firearms could be used in space. But if you were in charge of security outside of a space station, would a normal handgun even fire without atmospheric oxygen in a microgravity environment?
Gunpowder has its own oxidizer built into it, so it would fire. If you managed to get the firing pin to hit the end of the bullet, it would go off. Now, would it eject the slide and the next bullet go into the round, and would that work? That's a good question. I'm not real positive that it would fire more than a few times before it seized up and quit working.
A big part of the problem is that the metal moving parts inside guns need lubricants to work smoothly. But the harsh extremes of space would probably cause the lubricants to fail.
If a handgun got in the sunlight, for example, it would get really, really hot, and the parts would seize together probably. If it were not in the sunlight, it would get really, really cold, and the parts would seize together probably. And lubricants just have a hard time of working in the vacuum of space. The biggest problem is they bead up. They turn into little balls because there's no gravity or any other atmosphere that it can adhere to.
Astronauts have demonstrated the same thing when they drink liquids in microgravity. Instead of flowing evenly, the liquids separate into a series of spheres. But there is one system that would work well for keeping away the bad guys in space: launching bullets with a railgun. Railguns use a series of strong magnetic fields rather than gunpowder to propel bullets. Current railgun projectiles can already race down range about 3 times faster than a bullet from an M16 rifle.
The idea of a railgun is you take a small pellet that's maybe metal, it may be plastic, maybe whatever, but you have to have it wrapped in aluminum foil because you complete an electric circuit between 2 long rails, and the magnetic field created accelerates that little pellet out the end of the rails, and it can accelerate it very fast, up to, some people believe, close to the speed of light.
Similar systems are at work in certain bullet trains and roller coasters.
We have a series of magnets, and the magnets propel an object, either a roller coaster car or this giant slug of a bullet you want to use to hit something in space, from one to the other, accelerating as it goes, and by the time it's reached a certain number of accelerators, a certain number of pairs of magnets, it's really going as fast as you need it to go.
Mounted on a large spacecraft, the railgun could become the naval cannon of the future. Long rows of powerful magnets could propel big projectiles to millions of miles an hour. But would that kind of gun be enough to take out an alien civilization before it could destroy Earth? 100 years from now, spaceships at war may blast away with ultra-high-speed railguns that destroy targets without explosives. Just by slamming into the enemy at many thousands or even millions of miles an hour, they'll release incredible amounts of kinetic energy, the energy of motion. In 2008, the U.S. Navy tested the most powerful railgun that now exists. Using a series of magnets and strong electrical currents, it launched a 7-pound projectile at over 5,000 miles an hour. The gun's estimated range, when fully operational, will be 200 miles.
A slug, moving at 7 times the speed of sound, does a lot of damage. It's one of those things where you're glad it's on our side.
It's the kind of weapon that could really do some damage to the capital city of a violent alien civilization.
You can envision the big mothership having a railgun that runs along the periphery from one end to the other, and it could shoot a very large projectile like the size of a car or a bulldozer that you could then accelerate on that railgun maybe 10%, 20% the speed of light. And that much kinetic energy could likely destroy the whole city. I mean, that's a lot of energy.
But such an advanced railgun is obviously a long way off. So are there any kinetic energy weapons that could come to space in the near future? Remember the telephone pole-sized rod pummeling the underground bunker in our moon battle set 100 years from now? Well, that weapon, known as a rod from God, is simple enough that it could show up if a war comes to space in the next few decades. A small rocket boost would get the aerodynamic rod started.
It's basically just a big metal rod, and it'd probably be something like tungsten or some really strong and heavy metal that you can put in orbit and drop it onto the wherever you want, whatever the target is, from space, and just let gravity accelerate the thing.
Gravity's ability to speed up an object and increase its destructive power can be seen in a weapon from centuries past. The trebuchet, which is a type of catapult, used to rain down destruction from on high.
Gravity acts upon an object like this rock at a rate of 10 meters per second squared, roughly 30 feet per second squared. So if we take it and drop it, it's fallen for less than a second, has not come close to reaching 30 feet per second. But take that same rock, launch it with the trebuchet, higher, further, it will have a chance to accelerate to 30 feet per second, 60 feet in the second, 90 feet in the third second. When it hits, it'll leave a much bigger crater. This rock traveled through the air for about 5 seconds, which means that by the time it hit, it was traveling close to or around 150 feet per second. And with that added kinetic energy, it left a much bigger crater.
In the battle 100 years from now, the rod launched at the moon has an advantage over the rock from the trebuchet on Earth. Since the moon doesn't have any atmosphere, the rod keeps accelerating until it impacts the underground command post of the Separatist colony. It burrows into the moon rock and destroys the command post. But what if the Separatists on the moon return the favor and launch a rod from a space platform at Earth? Earth's atmosphere will slow the rod, but will it be enough to prevent a knockout blow to an underground headquarters on Earth?
When it hits the upper atmosphere, it's doing about Mach 25 times the speed of sound. It slows down as it comes down through the atmosphere, but if it were to hit the Earth, it would bore way down in there because it's going to hit at like 5,000, 7,000 miles per hour. So the amount of energy that's dumped in a very small space in a very short amount of time is equivalent to a small nuclear weapon.
Something like this would have a lot of penetrating power and would be the ultimate bunker buster.
But as impressive as the speeds of rods from God and railgun projectiles are, nothing can compete with the laser's speed, the 186,000 miles per second speed of light. Lasers have always been the favorite weapon of science fiction space battles.
The idea of having a personal laser is just fascinating and attractive. I would have loved one at the age of 12 myself. It's the same way that kids sometimes want to be cowboys and gunslingers. There's something very fun about the idea of having a weapon that is quick, painless, instantaneous, and makes you the toughest SOB in the valley.
But what exactly is a laser?
Lasers can be thought of as sort of a high-tech flashlight. But all the waves are in phase, so you've got all the wave crests lining up. So that makes the radiation really intense for a given amount of power. See, normal light from a flashlight or from the sun is all out of phase. It's incoherent. Some wave crests are like this, the wave troughs of other waves are like that. They tend to largely cancel out. And what you see is the leftover parts that didn't cancel out.
Most visible light laser beams appear as a certain color, since only the light in that specific color frequency is lined up and coming out of the chamber. And different types of lasers can damage targets in different ways. This green light laser at Stanford University's High Power Laser Lab pulses on and off in powerful bursts.
Is actually not delivering a lot of heat. What it is, though, is a very strong electric field. And this one can provide a strong enough electric field. By creating a high electric field, you can rip apart atoms, you can rip electrons off of atoms if you wish, and you can break down materials.
The strong electrical field even rips apart air molecules. They come back together between each pulse.
And that's when you get this flash, that's when the energy comes out, and you see the light, and you get the report that way, much like thunder and lightning.
And these strong fields are especially good at knocking out electronic equipment. In fact, the laser beam is so powerful, it actually damaged our camera as we recorded these images, when dust particles deflected part of the pulse into the lens. It left a permanent green imprint on the camera's light-gathering CCD imager. Another laser at the lab demonstrates the power of continuous waves instead of pulses. It's an infrared beam, so it's not visible to the human eye, but it's a